Hello all and welcome to another episode of Hyper Blue Reviews. Today's topic, Dogurai for the PS4. Looking for a retro-style platforming game that is reminiscent of old Game Boy games? Dogurai is here to slice through the competition. It blends equal parts Mega Man, Ninja Gaiden, and other tough platformers from the past. The game features 8 stages with countless enemies to hack and slash your way through. Dogurai was developed and published by Hungry Bear Games for PC and published by QU Byte Interactive for the PlayStation 4. It features 2 dog samurai, or Dogurai if you will, with varying methods of attack. Does it live up to the mind-numbing difficulty of its predecessors, or does it provide a whole new unique experience? Let's delve in. The game takes place in a dystopian future. Living law enforcement and military personnel were replaced by robots and machines. One day, the creator of these robots decides to flip the switch and take over the world, as creators of robots tend to do. Bones, a retired Dogurai from these special forces, decides to fight against the robot menace by himself. Like I mentioned before, the game plays a bit like a cross between Mega Man and Ninja Gaiden. It plays like Mega Man in that you select a stage from a variety of different stages. Each stage has a robot leader at the end that has its own set of skills and abilities. You can play the stages in any order you would like. Once you tackle 4 stages, you get introduced to some of the final stages that contain more intense platforming aspects and difficult bosses. It's reminiscent like Ninja Gaiden in terms of its hack and slash platformings, as well as the plethora of enemies that are thrown at you. Some of the settings for this game include the city, fighting in urban sewers, military facilities, factories, and even sky-high structures. Each level has its own gimmick or challenge that was inspired from platforming games of yesteryear. For instance, one level has you riding a motorcycle through a desert, while another has a lava chase sequence. I'd like to break the gameplay up into 2 sections. First, I'm going to talk about the gameplay as Bones. So as stated previously, this game is a 2D platformer that heavily relies on hack and slash elements. Bones walks at a brisk pace, but he can't really run. He can also slide and double jump to gain access to higher ground. The slide is incredibly useful for dodging aerial attacks and getting under bosses as they jump around. It's also useful to move slightly faster than just walking. His sword skills are minimal at best. You can swing your sword while jumping and also pull off a 3-swing combo on the ground, but that's about it. You can also slice through most projectiles that are fired by enemies, which is a very cool concept that this game introduces. Most enemies Bones encounters go down in one hit, with the exception of heavy enemies. Heavy enemies require you to perform some quick-time events. Bones can attack an enemy up to 5 times depending on how many quick-time events you successfully complete. There are also quick-time events that occur during boss fights. Occasionally, the robot leader gets winded. Yes, I understand the irony in that statement. We'll just say he has to recharge. And when he's recharging, you have a chance to pull off a 5-hit combo. Throughout the game, you can find hidden areas in each stage. Most contain health pickups or lives, but there are some that contain chatty NPCs or floppy disks. There's no explanation on what the floppy disks do during normal gameplay. It's not until you get to the last stage that you find out that you need them in order to save your companion, Ryder. Collect all 4, and Ryder is released from captivity. Collect anything less than 4, and you have to fight an evil version of your companion. Think Mega Man X2 if you don't get all the 0 parts. If you collect all 4 floppy disks and beat the game, you can choose Ryder as a playable character when you start a new game. Which brings us up to the next topic. Gameplay as Ryder. So as I mentioned before, Ryder is Bones' companion. He specializes in throwing shurikens. The best part about this, Ryder can throw shurikens in 3 directions. You got straight forward, he can throw them diagonally up, and he can throw them diagonally down. You can snipe enemies and bosses from a distance with this character. This makes the game incredibly easy. The game itself doesn't change depending on which Dogurai you choose. The only difference is which Dogurai is trapped in the final stage. If you choose Ryder, Bones is trapped. If you choose Bones, Ryder's trapped. You can also choose 2 difficulty settings to play the game through, normal mode and hard mode. The only differences between normal and hard mode that I found is, with hard mode you start with a finite number of lives, otherwise it's infinite. In hard mode you start with 9 lives to be exact. It's an odd choice given that they're dogs, but I digress. Lives are scattered throughout the levels, so you never truly have to worry about losing them all. Plus, if you play as Ryder, you can snipe enemies from far away, so things are even easier. Best advice I can give for hard mode is, just take your time. The controls are very fluid. The game looks like a Game Boy game, but it plays like a 2D platformer from the modern era. I never found myself missing platforms due to shoddy controls or misleading level design, unlike old Game Boy platformers. The controls are smooth and I was always able to land a jump, with the exception of moving platforms, that is. Those you have to time just right. One complaint I have, and it's kind of a major one for me, is the amount of enemies that pop up from off screen. If you're trying to make a jump to a platform that is just off screen, 9 times out of 10 an enemy will pop out and hit you. It seems like this was added just for A, a cheap hit, and B, with the purpose of prolonging gameplay, given that once you get hit while you're jumping, you typically fall into a pit. Speaking of getting hit, Hungry Bear Games decided to add an old trope into their game, character knockback. It's not very fun for jumping over large gaps, or in general. The bosses have a health meter similar to Mega Man and Robot Masters. Every hit that you deliver to the boss takes out 1 sliver of health. If there's a way to take a larger chunk of health off, I haven't found it yet. This doesn't necessarily ruin the experience by any means, but it does get frustrating when the enemy can take a quarter of your health with 1 to 2 hits. The music in the game is fantastic. Every stage has a memorable theme that I found myself humming after a few retries. I hate to admit, but I did die a lot at first. If you're a fan of 8-bit sounding music, you'll love this. Even my 4-year-old son was rocking out to it. As I mentioned up above, hard mode is just normal mode without infinite lives, and it basically becomes easy mode with Ryder. And honestly, I never played as Bones again after I unlocked Ryder. Bones just isn't that versatile. The game's store page also states this as a feature, so I figured I'd mention it here. Bones has a boopable snooter. That's all I'm going to say about that. The game definitely has solid controls, but it loses points with me due to the amount of enemies on screen. It's a bit out of hand at times and caused a great amount of frustration on my part. This was especially true for stages with large pits. Later levels really put the game's controls to test with difficult jumps and maneuvers. Some of the jumps in the later parts of the game were so frustrating that I honestly did want to sling my controller across the room. Also, playing through the game with a set amount of lives made me realize something. I don't miss playing games like this from my past. I remember being frustrated back then, and I definitely got frustrated with this. It makes going for the achievements almost not really worth it. I say almost because the game is still fun and enjoyable despite the constant barrage of enemies. As I mentioned before, the game features different gimmicks or gameplay elements. These gameplay elements do add some uniqueness to each level, but they can also be a bit frustrating at times. Take the lava chase scene, for example. You can outrun the lava pretty quickly, but there are enemies everywhere. It'd be one thing if you were on solid ground, but half the time you're jumping over lava. You get hit by an enemy, you fall in the lava. You get hit by an enemy, you fall into the lava that's chasing you. It gets old quick. Then there's a stage with pistons that crush you. Okay, easy enough to time, but then you have to worry about the direction of the conveyor belts on the ground. Okay, great, I landed the jump, but I didn't note the direction of the conveyor belt quick enough, so I got crushed because I couldn't move. So when I say gimmicks, I almost mean death trap sections, and there's at least one of these death trap sections per stage. It almost seems like it's the developer's way of artificially lengthening the gameplay, and I don't really like that direction. Each level has a unique color scheme to distinguish one level from another. The changing colors are cool at first, but I had trouble distinguishing Bones and some enemies from the background in some stages. This was especially true in the volcano stage. Getting hit is inevitable in this situation, and it really does take some of the enjoyment out of the game. That being said though, you can change the color scheme in the option menu. But honestly, it's harder going to one color for all levels when the colors help distinguish the different levels. You know, red is volcano, brown is desert, and so on. I found myself having a hard time with the bosses when I was playing as Bones. They all have patterns and they're mostly easy to recognize, but the fact that they take so much health from you and you're only able to take 1 bar of health from them teeters on unfair at times. And this is especially true given that there's only certain times you can hit the bosses anyway. However, when you play as Ryder, the bosses are too easy. Maybe I just got used to the patterns at that point, but being able to throw shurikens from the other side of the stage was very helpful. All in all though, the game is enjoyable, however it is a bit on the short side. It's a good game for those that can't devote a lot of time to longer titles, and I enjoyed it for what it was. If you want to play through this one in one sitting, it's certainly possible to do so, it just takes a bit of practice. And despite the level of frustration, I did find myself going back for the achievements and just playing the game in general. I definitely enjoyed the game, and even more so when I unlocked Ryder. This style of gameplay seems better suited for this game as opposed to getting up and close with Bone. Despite never wanting to play games that remind me of the difficult games from my youth, I would still love to see a sequel to this game. I give Dogurai 3.5 boopable snooters out of 5. Thanks for watching.